Hello everyone. Wanted to talk about working with other people. And most of us like to work with other people, but we spend a lot of time thinking on our own. That's my typical workflow. I like to work with people, but the things I pursue often I'm thinking about these ideas by myself. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at some historical figures who have done great things, because we often think of people working by themselves and creating great ideas. And that's sometimes the case, but sometimes they use other people to help them. And let me just kind of go quickly through, I think, a few people in the arts and sciences, people who have been helped by other people. And of course, your list is probably a lot longer than this, but these are just some highlights. And I think of, for me, classically, it's Picasso and Braque, who really had this deep friendship and collaborated a lot and compared their paintings with each other. And Picasso famously said, or something to the effect, I don't let my paintings go out the door until Braque has released them. That's really a bad paraphrase. But there was that kind of close relationship and that kind of bouncing out ideas that was really important to Picasso. And Picasso is unique because I was thinking about him. I really like Picasso. You can really deep dive into his paintings. But on the other hand, you could argue his refinement is not like some other artists. He was so, well, anyway, that's a whole thing. But also the Impressionists were certainly of that ilk too. They leaned on each other because they were finding the academy and the art schools in developing a new type of art. And that often happens, and often you need a community to create new ideas, because you need that kind of reassurance from other people that you're not just crazy. So that's you see that in the art community a bit. In fact, it's interesting, like Paul Feyerabend, the philosopher of science, talks about some of this stuff and how, and other philosophers too, of course, about intellectual ecologies that keep things from kind of sprouting out, and how we tend to define borders even in science. And in fact, looking at science, you think of Einstein, and Einstein's a unique fellow because he came up, he had his magic year, he came up with great ideas. Well, he didn't like French, he did not like to learn things he did not want to learn. He did not like to learn things he did not want to learn. And I'm not Einstein, but that's how I feel about a lot of things. And often when you're going through your early education, you're forced to learn stuff and you don't really like to. And it's, wiser people are imputing this curriculum onto you, and it makes sense. They have a broad education. But you get to a point where you say, I really want to get from A to B, let's do that. Okay, I don't want to go to these other places. And Einstein was that way. He struggled with French. He didn't really struggle with math in the way that historically thought. He didn't fail math. He had one professor that did not like him in experimental physics, I think it was, and gave him a 1, the lowest grade possible, in his university studies. But he didn't think math was that helpful for a physicist. So he was going from A to B, thinking his mind thoughts and all this kind of stuff. Well, he had a friend, Marcel Grossman, famously, his father got him the job at the patent office. But Grossman knew tensor calculus and could present sort of non-Euclidean geometry and other elements that Einstein needed to mathematically describe his notion of general relativity. So he really he used Grossman and others, to kind of help him move forward with his ideas. And that's a really common area. Even Bohr, the quantum physicist, used Kierkegaard, the philosopher, in developing his thoughts. And so you have a lot of cases, and you certainly see this with executive management, where you plug in the right people to fill holes in your own knowledge. And if you're at the genius level, like Einstein, you find people that can help you give voice to your ideas or fill in these gaps. So that's a big area. Finally, though, if we look at the person that does kind of operate on his or her own, it's smaller, and it's this sort of taxonomy of like Picasso who needed people, Einstein who used people, and if we look at someone like Mozart and others who were formally trained and then went forward into the dark on their own and created wonderful things. Now, of course, Mozart Mozart's father was a musician, and he was, infused with that whole culture. But, and Mozart's kind of famous and in this sort of thing. And of course, you could pick other people. In fact, Oscar Peterson, in a more contemporary sense, the jazz pianist composer, did a lot of the improvisational work on the keyboard. That was all him. It was like Mozart, he was trained and went forward. And I like to think of Emily Dickinson in the same way, because she really didn't, I don't think, got a lot of feedback on her poetry during her life. She did get some, of course, and people that saw it loved it. But she was not into the community of poetry at all. She was not into she wasn't. She was a solitary person doing remarkable works in poetry. And so those, I just pick a few here, a bit unfair, but Mozart, Dickenson, and Peterson, for example, as examples of people who kind of really struck out on their own. So Emily Dickinson was unique just because, I think about her, and she really was unique because she worked in such solitude, and I can't, it's hard to imagine that. But then, to end it here, like Michelangelo's workers, the ones that painted the Sistine Chapel, he didn't do it by himself. He had a lot of talent out there, as did a lot of artists, and you don't know who to attribute what to. So we attribute, great works to great names, and it kind of is a brand identity. But I think, in closing, one of the unique things is you have people that have great abilities of all sorts, but they don't get to use them. They don't learn about their inner talent. They don't get perhaps the education that brings it forward in a more refined way, or they don't have a venue to present it. That history's full of that. One must presume. So there's a great musician in Sulawesi who, his family is really proud of him. In fact, but nobody's ever heard of him, even though he had great potential. And I think, you can only imagine that happens all the time. So some people, rise to the top. In fact, I guess I'm talking too long here, but I remember a delightful experience, which I actually mentioned in my Venezuela video, but when I worked in Venezuela and I'd take a walk at night, and one time I heard this beautiful music coming from the dark, and there was no electricity there, so pretty much everyone was in the dark when the sun set. Anyway, I went in to check to see what this was. I thought it was a radio. It was a family just playing. The mom and the dad and the kids were playing this beautiful music in a jungle hut in the middle of nowhere. Literally in the Llaneros, or they were Llaneros, but anyway, down in southern Venezuela. So I thought that was really beautiful. These really kind of gifted musicians just playing to entertain themselves, because there was no TV or radio or anything, no electricity. So I just think that's interesting to think that we have these great names, we put labels on them, and they certainly are great in many ways, but there are probably other great people doing wonderful things that we just don't hear about. So anyway, thanks for listening to my rambling discussion of working with other people. Thank you.